Dear listeners, there is something that happens when you stand barefoot on grass, or sit under a tree, or just stop moving for long enough to hear the wind. Something in your body exhales, not your lungs, something deeper, like a part of you that's been holding on for a very, very long time. Finally remembers it's allowed to let go. So the question is, what if that is not a poetic? What if that's actually belong biology? And what if our disconnection from the nature is one of the least talked about reasons so many of us feel unsafe in our own skin? So that's where today's conversation, dear listeners. So welcome back to another powerful episode of Mind Meets Machine, where we explore the intersection of human experience, science, and the things that make us more fully ourselves. And I am your host, Avik, and I'm genuinely glad that all of you are here today. And my guest today is a nature based nervous system specialist and the founder of Abundance World, Canada's first queer centered wellness sanctuary, whose work weaves together neuroscience, somatics, and forest bathing to help leaders and professionals regulate the stress, restore belonging, and make decisions they can truly thrive with. So please welcome my lovely guest, Frankie Edwards. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Amazing, amazing. So, Frankie, before we get into the science and sanctuary, everything that you have built, I want to start with a moment. Like, was there a specific experience in nature that you can point to, like something you felt in your body that told you that this was the direction your life needed to go?
Mm, Thank you for that. There has been, and I
Mm,
wasn't planning on just opening up with this, but
okay.
in 2012,
Uh-huh.
I have a science background and I studied kinesiology. I went on to study medicine. And
Hmm.
in 2012, my father passed away. And that was a really, really integral moment for me. One of his last breaths, I actually climbed into the palliative care bed that he was in with him and gave him one final hug.
Hmm.
And as he passed away, my soul actually kind of took his soul to the place that I guess he considered heaven. And lo and behold, it looked like a place that we already lived in. It was a forest, it was a river, it was a beautiful, beautiful wind and trees and the smell of pine and everything that I already knew about nature. And then it kind of hit me that, I came back to reality, and after about 6 months, that experience was really profound and really weighing on me. And it did hit me. I said, wow, heaven is actually a place on earth. What if heaven is a place on earth? And so that, kind of cracked me open, and the grief really cracked me open, that whole experience through nature. The one thing that kept me really close to him as I was going through all the grief after he passed was going out by the river and seeing the way that the sun shimmered off the water and just feeling the breeze on my skin and smelling the pine trees and knowing that, the ones that we have lost are not that far away. And so, yeah, from coming from a science kid who studied neuroscience, studied kinesiology, really believed in one kind of reductionistic model of healthcare, that really cracked me open. And so this is kind of the work that I do now. It's how do we blend all of the social determinants of health that we call them, and then also the science and the spirit, the sacred and the holy and everything else that makes us real here. So that really started my abundance world journey. After 13 years after that experience, the business was actually born.
Amazing, amazing. So the phrase "go outside, you will feel better" is something most of us have heard our whole lives, and most of us have probably dismissed it at some point as too simple, too soft, too much like advice from a grandparent rather than a solution to something real, right? So what's the misconception underneath that dismissal? Like the thing that keeps people from understanding what nature actually does to the nervous system at a biological level?
That's a great question. So I remember being in medical school and learning a lot of different types of medicines around the world. And with that understanding, knowing that, for most of humanity's existence here on Earth, we survived off of what we now call traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or indigenous medicines. So all these traditional medicines that exist that we actually, especially folks in the scientific and academic community, kind of dismiss now as, yeah, exactly, like grandmother's medicine, or
Mm,
wisdom that can't be replicated in scientific literature and that kind of thing. I think there's a big misconception around that, because long before we had modern medicine, which has really only been about 300, 400 years, humans were surviving, we were thriving, we were also killing each other just like we are today.
exactly.
but but people tend to actually survive and
Mm,
thrive. The question of, how do we link it with our biology? I think today is like scientific methods and the language that we use around that is really just a sign of the times, and a different language that we understand how we're actually living and functioning in the world. And yes, a lot of my clients do need that interpretation. They need to know how their nervous system is responding and reacting, and that for some reason in their mind gives them more permission to actually relax, or that it is real for some reason. I believe that there's a big disconnect between our somatic and embodied nature and how we interpret our nature, right? One of them is looking at the lens through the mind, through our brain, through like the language that we use, the culture that we have. And another one is actually learning about more so, focusing on the actual embodied experiential nature of it. And we lack that today. We really do lack that. And most of us, more than half the world's population live in cities. So when do we get a chance to go outside? When do we get a chance to actually just touch a tree and the message that pops into our head, trust that message? It doesn't have to be written in a textbook to be accurate. We are disconnected from our own intuition and from our own truth. So that's really what nature brings back to us, is that sense of trusting in ourselves, that the messages that we receive in our bodies, when the hair stands up on the back of our neck, or
mm.
you get a really good feeling about something and you have no idea why. We just chalk it up to waking up on the right side of the bed that day. But we do have this sense of intuition, this sixth sense almost. And in order to get to that and work with that sixth sense, we actually have to be embodied in our five senses first. And a lot of us are not. We're still in our heads.
So, you talk about belonging as a biological need and not just as an emotional one, but something the body actually requires. So, I find that fascinating because belonging is usually framed as a social or psychological concept. So, what's underneath it as the nervous system level? I mean, at the nervous system level, like what is actually happening in the body when someone doesn't feel they belong to a place, to community, to themselves, anything?
Yeah, great question. Right now, and the science has kind of caught up with what I'm going to talk about, which is like the gut mind brain body axis. Before, we kind of studied things in silos, so that your mental health was not at all related to your digestive health. And that's just one example, but there are so many nowadays that you can actually see. You can look at someone's tongue, you can look at someone's skin and understand what systems are in or out of dysfunction, right? And then using the actual language of science. So you have like two different sides of your nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic is when you're activated. So that you can think of as like, when the lion is coming to get you and you start to run. So that's more of the like fight, flight, or flee approach. And that is when you're actually activated. So obviously your nervous system jacks up, your heart rate goes up, you start to sweat a little bit. You might not have full frontal of your brain, that frontal lobe in your brain. You might not have full executive function of that because your
Mm,
body takes over. So that's one side of the coin. That's the sympathetic side. We are often in that state, even if there's no lion running after us right now. These days
exactly.
there's a lot of other pressures, there's timelines, there's stressors that actually also don't go away, which is almost worse. It leads to chronic stress and when your body's in a state of elongated sympathetic nervous system activation.
Exactly.
The parasympathetic, which para you can think of kind of like as like a lowering. So think of that as when you're actually like in a state. People think of it as like rest and digest. So you're in a more calm state, you're more relaxed, you're able to actually function. What you eat, you might not throw up, right? You'll actually digest it. So when you're in that parasympathetic state, which is again termed an activation, but it's activating the body's ability to function as it should under safe circumstances. So there's no lion, there's no nothing. You're just at your house, relaxing, able to eat your dinner, able to digest, no problem. And we are not often in that state. And so there's a lot of things, I'm sure we'll get into this, modalities that can help you get there. However, from a scientific perspective, like even little things like hugging someone in your household, maybe a family member, that actually increases your oxytocin pretty much immediately. So oxytocin is a neurotransmitter in your body, and it tells the body to relax. It tells the body to soften. It actually makes the muscles relax in your legs, in your arms, whatever. So we get that sense of relaxation. When breath work people talk about, bringing your shoulders up to the ears and then relaxing down again. That sense of contraction and then release actually tends to release everything in your body. So from a biologic perspective, that, just oxytocin is one example, but there are so many that you can actually utilize and just be able to like live and function a normal life without getting like super overwhelmed, super stressed out, chronic stress that will lead to illnesses. So that's definitely not where we want to go. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we are in today's world.
And if I also ask, like how does that compound in the nervous system? Like I have to say that for the 2SLGBTQ plus community and the queer professionals you center in your work, the experience is not, I would say, belonging of having to perform safety in spaces that were not built with you in mind. So how does that compound in the nervous system over time? What do you say?
Yeah. It's especially prevalent in
Mm,
the 2S LGBTQ community, queer communities. I mean, any underprivileged community, marginalized community, that there's a sense of you don't belong here, right? You're not normal. And there's almost a pressure to even just exist as someone else for your entire life. Imagine that pressure over time, continuous pressure for years and years and years, not living as yourself, living with a mask on. And that is kind of, in my opinion, where the deepest suffering comes from in disconnection. So we are taught that we're already disconnected, that we don't belong. And when you remember that you do belong, and just because you exist, you earned it because you are there. You don't have to actually do anything or wear a mask or wear different clothes or perform any different type of way. That makes a profound shift in your nervous system. You shift from, like I said, that parasympathetic side of things, the sympathetic side of things into the parasympathetic side of things. And for me, I think the foundation of safety and then going up from there to explore who you actually are and be your authentic self, the foundation of that really starts with getting your nervous system on track, feeling the safety, being able to sit in the parasympathetic and allow your digestion to happen. Even from like a linguistic perspective, when I talk about digestion, I'm talking about the gastrointestinal system, right? But digesting things could be other ways. In English, we say like, how are you, did you swallow that? As in like, did you bite your tongue? Did you not speak your truth? Did you not do the thing that makes you feel like you? And so there's a lot of other ways we could interpret it. But yeah, the actual sense of being in the body, having your feet on the ground, feeling the sense of the weight of your body, or how your sits bones feel as they sit on the chair that you're in. All of these things really contribute to being able to really root down. And then from there, once you're rooted, we can expand and branch out.
Exactly true. And also, like your title for this conversation is You Belong to the Land. And I want to sit with that phrase for a moment because it does something interesting. It's like, it doesn't say the land belongs to you, it says you belong to it. That's a different orientation entirely. So, what does it mean to reconnect with that sense of belonging? Not just as a wellness practice, but as a foundation of, for the authenticity.
Definitely. The idea of saying you belong to the land and not the reverse, I
Uh-huh.
think kind of actually comes from how my years of experience in the healthcare industry have kind of looked a bit different than others, in the sense that I'm always thinking about how can we decolonize wellness? And that means centering community over individualism. So right from there, instead of saying I belong, or the earth belongs to me, it's more
Uh,
that we belong to her as a whole community, as a whole entity. And decolonizing wellness looks for me like really getting in touch with the land in a more than scientific nature, because this land has been here for a lot longer than we have. And there's been stewards of land that have been here for generations, even before my ancestors got here. I'm in Toronto, so North America, in the Indigenous First Nations here, they called North America Turtle Island. And Turtle Island existed long before, it was called North America. And so how can we acknowledge our lineage, and how can we acknowledge honoring the land that we stand on in a way that kind of gives us more of a relationship with land versus extraction from the land? And that really, like, in terms of safety, in terms of harm, it goes beyond just versus personal safety and personal harm. It goes beyond how do we create healing spaces that don't replicate systems of harm? The colonial nature or the capitalistic nature that we are all in. And this can be seen even from our own healthcare system now. There's lots of things here in Canada that you have to pay for. And so, we've used to have mostly a universally paid for system of healthcare. And now we have some privatization kind of seeping into that. So yeah, I always ask myself kind of like, how do we not replicate systems of harm on the greater scale? And that means designing programs that are not just inclusive to the queer
uh,
community, but centered for the queer community. So how can we invite people in and have them centered and have their experience centered, rather than just say, oh yeah, this exists. Oh, and we'll like maybe open a pocket so that you feel included. No, that's not how
exactly.
accessibility and resourcing works, right? So that's kind of where it all stems from. If you just look at across the board, everyone has their own faiths, everyone has their own religion, everyone has their own background and story to tell. And that's what makes life beautiful. And so when we look at decolonizing wellness, how do we make it so that everyone's experience is actually centered in that? And you really have to do some thinking and planning and preparation and apologizing and reconciling and all of that, and reckoning with your own history and lineage and how you have bias in your own opinions and ways of doing things. So yeah, all across that, what is the common denominator between us all that holds humanity together? We all stand on Earth. We are all part of nature. We're all part of this big, beautiful blue planet. And even in Toronto, it's one of the most multicultural cities in the world. And I can go ahead and ask anyone here. It doesn't matter what they look like, who they worship, anything. I can ask them, what's your favorite tree? And they'll have something to say. It could be a tree from where they're from, or it could be something that they found once they moved here. But there's this piece of nature brings us back together. And it almost immediately shifts people out of fight or flight and defense mode into more, but this is like a little bit more welcoming now. I can tell you a little bit about my story and about where I'm from.
Ah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, did that answer your question?
I mean, exactly. So from here, I was just thinking, I was thinking about a situation. Uh, like, suppose someone gets a taste of that. Like, they do a forest bathing session. They feel something shift. They feel more grounded than they have in months. And then Monday comes and the inbox is full. The meetings are back. The city is loud, too much of noise. How do you help someone hold on to what they found in nature when they're back inside the machine? And what makes the regulation actually sick? I mean, why I'm this why this is I'm asking is like same thing happened with me also. I mean, just a week prior only, I went for not a vacation, but it's a kind of uh, staying away from everything. Uh, it's a separate place, very calm, very a good morning, great breakfast, then enjoyed my whole day. But then again, after some day when I back, I feel like, where am I?
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
totally know the feeling. I know that feeling big time. As someone
yeah,
who spends a lot of time, yeah, I'm in the city and then I'm also out in nature. I think it's more about consistency rather than anything. And there are little things that you could do in terms of even bringing the nature, bringing the outside in. Um, there are some measurable
okay,
differences that happen when you actually engage in nature immersion, right? So forest bathing, going out in nature, staring at a mountain, even that sense of awe. But in your body, you have a drastic decrease in stress levels. Like we see in forest bathing, just the first 20 minutes, huge decreases in a person's cortisol levels. And so, yeah, you're talking about going back to the office on Monday morning and cortisol shot up again. How do we get that
exactly.
back down, or where do we find the happy medium? It's something I do focus on in my retreats, because same thing with vacations, same thing with retreats, you totally kind of detoxify for 5, 6, 7 days. And
Yeah,
then you have to go back, as you said, in the machine. And it's kind of interesting because these days I think there's parts of me that wishes the machine were different. And I see that this machine that we've created is also collapsing in its own way, and like kind of evolving and changing in its own way. The things that we see, I think, are more projections of what we understand, right? So if you consider that your workplace is a place of chaos, it's going to increase your blood pressure as soon as you step into the office. That will happen. Of course it's going to happen because you sense that, right? There's research on even staring at a green patch of green paint in an
okay.
office, on an office wall, decreases your perception of stress.
Uh,
And so I wonder if there's ways that we can actually bring the outside in, right? So there's like little, maybe planting trees or sinking your hands into your garden. And it could be just a box on your patio if you live on a condo, like
uh,
little things that really make a big difference, like sinking your hands and your feet into the soil, even just appreciating and preparing your own vegetables for dinner that night. Like I had this experiment a couple of years back where instead of using a knife to chop my vegetables, I actually broke them with my hands. And it felt way more primal in that way. And just felt like, if I didn't have this tool, this is how I would do it. And maybe I wouldn't even use utensils. I would just kind of like get in there and like eat with my face and chew. And rip bites off with my teeth and all that. And there's a sense of being a little bit more wild. And for some people, that's really nerve-wracking. It could be even like chaotic in its own way. And I know a lot of people that don't like camping for that reason, or going out into
Yeah,
nature because they hate the flies and the bugs and everything. It causes them more stress. So do what feels right for you. But I can guarantee you that your cortisol levels, your stress levels, your blood pressure will all decrease, and your sense of presence, your sense of calm, and what we call heart rate variability, which is your ability to actually function better, that will increase as well. So lots of things, but yeah, you kind of have to take it slow. I mean, for me, even in the
exactly.
city, I'm not going to go into like a small park and do forest bathing and like walk with my
Yeah,
socks off, because who knows, there could be like anything on the
yeah,
grass.
exactly.
So you kind of have to suit it to what you need. And that's part of the work that I do is, assessing people's environment and understanding what and what they can't do and what's safe for them on a physical level. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so today, if you have to give one advice to the listener, what that will be?
Just one.
I mean, as many as you can, for sure.
So anybody who's listening out there, there is a sense of peace that you can connect pretty instantly with nature. And that is through your own mind. Even if you don't have, ground to stand on or soil to sink your hands into, you can take one small breath. Here with me, we can do it now. Feet on the ground, just breathing in through the nose and letting it out through the open mouth. It doesn't require forest, but it does require presence. And so what I'll say to you is the land is always willing to meet you where you are. It's not even, when I say land, I mean earth. There are a lot of different elements, right? So earth, wind, water, fire, you could think of a lot of different things that will bring you back down to earth, down to nature, without having to be in the forest. You could start a little fire and you could light a candle even. You could take a small breath and pretend, and not even pretend, but know that the wind that you're breathing in was once the wind on top of that big mountain that you see from your window. It's all about how you relate and the intention of being in relation to the earth. That's the common theme between us all.
Amazing. Amazing. And I believe most of the listeners definitely would love to connect with you. So, what will be the best medium to connect?
Yes, my abundanceworld.today website. It's just abundanceworld.today. I'm also on Instagram. It's under my own name. It's at the Frank chapter. And then if you're a TikTok person, I also have abundance_world. But the best way to reach me and all of those things, all of my socials, everything there are actually on the website. So just head over to abundanceworld.today and would love to connect.
Amazing. So, dear listeners, what I'll do is I'll put all the links and the details into the show notes for easy reference. Um, Before we move, I have to say that what I am taking as a takeaway from this conversation is like your nervous system was not designed for the peace of, or I don't say peace, it will be the race, the pace of the modern life, but it was designed for the earth. And every time you return to it, even briefly, you are not escaping reality. You are remembering like who you actually are. So that is something I'm taking away from this conversation. Do let us know like what you are taking from this conversation today. And I have to say, Frankie, I mean, you have brought something really generous for our listeners today. A 10-day challenge connected to this very theme. I mean, it's definitely great, and definitely I believe people would love to connect over there and connect with you for more information on the same. So, dear listeners, with this hope, this is the wrap of today's episode on Mind Meets Machine app. And if something Frankie said is still with you, a word, a feeling, a quiet recognition, follow that thread, and it's pointing somewhere that is worth going. And the 10-day challenge and all of Frankie's details are will be there in the show notes. And if this conversation belong in someone else's day, then please pass it along, and it will definitely make it justice. With this hope, this is your host Avik, and this is Mind Meets Machine. Go outside if you can, and if you cannot, then every 30 second at an uh, open window counts. Take care of yourself, and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.